Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm just going to cover using a flash to create a black background where you haven't actually got one, such as this white wall behind me. So, the way we're going to do this is we're going to drop the ambient light back down so it's black by lowering the exposure using the camera controls, and then we're going to introduce a flash to illuminate the subject. But before we go into the setup, there's a couple of things that we need to remember about the camera controls and flash itself. First of all, there are three controls in the camera that affect the light hitting the sensor. You have the ISO, the aperture and the shutter speed. The ISO is essentially the electronic amplification of all the light reaching the sensor. So this will affect both the ambient light and the flash. The aperture adjusts the size of the opening for the light to reach the shutter. And this also affects both the ambient and the flash. However, adjusting the shutter speed will only affect the exposure of the ambient light, not the light from the flash. And this is because the duration of the flash is minuscule in comparison to the duration of the shutter speed. Next, it's more to do with the flash and how light intensity falls off as we move away from the light source. Now this is all to do with the inverse square law, which states that the intensity of the light is inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the light source. In most simplistic terms, if you double the distance between the light and the subject, you quarter the intensity of the light reaching the subject. So the further a subject is from the light source, the less light reaching it, and the closer to the light source you are, the faster the fall off. Armed with this understanding, set your subject up as far from the background as you can, while still maintaining enough space in front of the subject for you to position the camera and so the subject is in frame and in focus. Start by setting the camera in manual mode, and with the flash turned off, adjust the settings for a black underexposed image of the background. So you want your ISO as low as possible. This one here we had it as ISO 100. You want your aperture narrow around f8 or greater to reduce the light entering, and your shutter speed to the sync speed that works for your flash camera combination, most of which are around 1/200th of a second. It's worth noting here though that if you do need to use a shutter speed of greater than the sync speed, you'd need to use something called high speed sync. And not all flashes have this function, and some flashes only have the function available when they're used directly on the camera's hot shoe and they're not suitable for off-camera flash. First of all, let's look at what happens when we have the flash about the same distance from the subject as the background. Turn on your flash and adjust the power to suitably expose the subject. The flash lights up the subject, but we still have some light falling on the background. If we just bring the flash in closer to the subject and keep the same settings, you can see that a similar amount of light remains hitting the background, but the subject is vastly overexposed. So we need to reduce the power of the flash. And with the flash close to the subject and the power output reduced to expose for the subject, we can see that we've now stopped the light falling on the background. This is due to the light fall off and the ratio of the distance from the light source to the subject in comparison to the background. I find that a ratio of about 1:4, maybe 1:5 works quite well for me, which is keeping the background at least 4 to 5 times as far from the subject as the flash is. And there you go, a black background for the shot without a backdrop. Now, this is a technique that can be used not only for close-up and macro photography, but also for portraits if you have enough space. Thanks for watching, hope you've enjoyed this. Please do remember to like, subscribe and let me know any comments down below.